The Whispering Woods of Oakhaven. This is a story based on something very real. Please enjoy. They say some places just hold on to things. Not memories, not echoes, but something far more potent. Something that sinks its roots deep into the soil and the very air itself. Oakhaven was one of those places, or more specifically, the woods that bordered it. I grew up in Oakhaven, a town so small it barely registered on most maps. Our nearest neighbor was 20 miles of winding road away, and our closest companion was the ancient, sprawling forest that hemmed us in on three sides. Everyone knew the woods, everyone respected them, and everyone, in their own way, feared them. It wasn't a fear born of wild animals or getting lost. We were all woodsmen and women, raised on the scent of pine and damp earth. No, this was a different kind of fear. A quiet, insidious dread that settled in your bones when the sun dipped below the tree line and the first tendrils of mist began to creep from the deepest hollows. My grandfather, a man who'd seen more than his fair share of the world, used to tell me stories. Not bedtime stories, but cautionary tales disguised as folklore. He'd talk about the whispers, said they lived in the oldest trees, in the places where the sunlight never touched the ground. He said they were hungry, not for blood, but for something else, something you couldn't quite name. We always dismissed them as old wives' tales, superstitions from a bygone era. But even as we scoffed, we never ventured into the woods after dark. Not once. That changed the summer of '98. It started subtly, as these things often do. Little things, objects misplaced, then found in impossible locations. A child's toy ending up on a high shelf. A set of keys appearing in the bottom of a locked drawer. We chalked it up to forgetfulness, to the quirks of an aging population. But the feel of unease was a low hum beneath the surface of our quiet lives. Then came the sounds. At first it was just the wind, or so we told ourselves. A low sighing that seemed to carry through the walls of our homes, even on the calmest nights. But soon the sighs grew into something more distinct. Whispers, faint, indistinct, just at the edge of hearing. Like a dozen voices murmuring secrets just beyond your bedroom window. My neighbor, old Mrs. Albright, swore she heard her name called one night. Clear as a bell, she said. But when she looked, there was no one there. She was a practical woman, not prone to flights of fancy. Her conviction unsettled us more than the whispers themselves. It was around that time that the animals started acting strangely. The birds, usually so vibrant and vocal, fell silent. The deer, normally shy and elusive, would stand frozen at the edge of the woods, staring towards the town with wide, unblinking eyes. And the dogs were the worst. They'd whine incessantly, their hackles raised, their gaze fixed on the shadows beneath the trees. They wouldn't bark, not even at strangers, just a low, mournful whine that could curdle your blood. My own dog, an old golden retriever named Rusty, was usually the most placid creature you could imagine, but he started refusing to go outside after dusk. He'd cower in the corner, trembling, staring at the back door as if something monstrous was waiting just beyond it. It broke my heart to see him like that. The fear, once a distant hum, was now a constant thrum in the air of Oakhaven. We started locking our doors earlier, checking windows more often. The community potlucks, once a weekly affair, grew sparse. People preferred to stay in their own homes. The faint whispers, a constant companion to their silent meals. The first person to disappear was Thomas Miller. Thomas was a solitary man, a skilled hunter who knew the woods better than anyone. He'd gone out one morning to check his traps and never returned. We organized a search party, of course. Every able-bodied person in Oakhaven combed the forest for days. We found his hunting rifle leaning against a tree, his empty thermos beside it. No tracks, no signs of a struggle, just gone. The official report said he likely got lost, or perhaps suffered a medical emergency. But we knew. We looked at each other, our eyes wide with unspoken dread. The whispers seemed to grow louder after Thomas vanished, more insistent. Then came Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was a young woman, barely out of her teens, full of life and laughter. She worked at the general store, always a smile for everyone. One evening, she stayed late to organize inventory. When her father went to pick her up, the store was empty. The lights were on, the till was open, and Sarah's purse lay on the counter. But Sarah was gone, just like Thomas. Panic began to set in. This wasn't a case of someone getting lost in the woods. This was something else. Something that could reach into our very homes, our safe spaces. The police from the nearest town were bewildered. They searched, they questioned, but they found nothing. They left, frustrated and clueless, leaving us to our growing terror. People started leaving Oak Haven. Not in a panicked exodus, but a slow, steady trickle. Families packed their cars in the dead of night, their faces pale and drawn. We understood. Who could blame them? But for those of us who stayed, the community began to shrink, and the whispers seemed to fill the silence left behind. My own experience came a few weeks after Sarah disappeared. I was home alone one evening, reading by the fire. The wind outside was picking up, rattling the old window panes. And then I heard it, clear as day. My name. Ethan. It whispered. Soft, almost like a sigh, but undeniably my name. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, just my imagination playing tricks. But then it came again. It was low, resonant, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't a single voice, but a chorus, a multitude of voices, all speaking in unison, yet each retaining its own faint individuality. It was like 1,000 leaves rustling, each carrying a fragment of a word. I gripped the arms of my chair. My knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to cover my ears. But there was another, more insidious pull. A strange, almost magnetic urge to follow the sound, to understand. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I walked slowly towards the back door, the whispers growing louder with each step. They weren't threatening, not exactly. More inviting, luring. They promised something ancient and profound. Just as my hand reached for the doorknob, Rusty, who had been cowering under the table, let out a piercing howl. It wasn't his usual mournful whine. This was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. He launched himself at my legs, biting at my trousers, pulling me away from the door with surprising strength from an old dog. His desperate cries broke through the haze the whispers cast over me. I looked down at him, his eyes wide and pleading, and the spell shattered. The whispers didn't disappear, but their seductive power waned. I stumbled backward, pulling Rusty close, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I spent the rest of that night huddled with Rusty, a shotgun across my lap, staring at the darkened windows. The whispers continued, a constant drone against the silence of night, but they never gained their hold over me again. After that night, I started paying closer attention to the stories, to the legends. I dug through old journals, faded newspaper clippings, and the dusty records in the town's small, forgotten library. I found references to other disappearances, stretching back decades, even centuries, always near the woods, always without a trace. One entry, from an old preacher's diary, chilled me to the bone. He wrote about a thinning of the veil around the woods, a place where the barrier between our world and something else grew weak. He spoke of entities that feed on awareness, that draw individuals into their realm, not through force, but through a slow, persuasive erosion of will. They do not want the body, he had written, his handwriting shaky and barely legible. They want the light within, the spark, the self. It made sense. Thomas and Sarah weren't murdered. They weren't taken by force. They were drawn. lured by the whispers until they stepped willingly into the embrace of whatever resided in those ancient woods. The true horror wasn't the physical threat, but the insidious psychological warfare. The way the whispers chipped away at your sanity, your sense of reality, until the unknown became more comforting than the known. The town of Oakhaven is almost empty now. Only a handful of us remain, bound by a stubborn sense of loyalty, or perhaps a terrifying inability to leave. We live by unspoken rules. Never go out after dark. Never listen to the whispers, no matter how enticing they sound. Never, ever look into the deepest shadows of the wood. Sometimes, on a particularly still night, I can still hear them, faint, distant, like the memory of a dream. They haven't given up. They're just waiting, patient, eternal. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my quiet house, I wonder if the whispers aren't just outside. I wonder if, after all this time, they haven't found a way to sink their roots into me. A quiet, insidious threat, even now, makes me wonder if I'm truly free or just another whisper, waiting to be called home. Because in Oakhaven, the woods don't just surround us. They seep into us, and they never truly let go. Consider subscribing. We'll be back for more.